From personal hells to characters secretly being dead, entire games being simulations, presidents being projects going unfinished, titles with hidden villains only found outside the discs, and even games predicting the future. This is the video game theory, iceberg. Majora's Mask and the 5 Stages of Grief. Despite being one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, I sadly have never really gotten around to playing it. Sorry to disappoint any of you. But this theory is so well known that even someone like me, who essentially never played a Zelda game before, even knows about it. It may even be the single most discussed video game theory of all time, at least that I know of, though that may be in contention with the next entry coming up. Either way, most regard The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, released in 2000 for the Nintendo 64, as one of the best games in the franchise, beloved for its darker undertones, intense difficulty, and unique atmosphere and narrative, especially when compared to the other Zelda games. This one is just different. Throughout the game, you, as Link, are racing against the clock, traversing a parallel world of Hyrule known as Termina, searching for Link's lost friend Navi. The game's most upfront and confronted theme is that of death and loss, easily exemplified alone by the title of the world Link explores, Termina, derived from the Latin root meaning end. Conveniently, there is a main hub and 4 main regions in the game, Clock Town being the central location, followed by Woodfall, Snowhead Mountains, Great Bay Coast, and Icona Canyon, all which, according to this theory, symbolizes or embodies one of the 5 stages of grief, known as the Kubler-Ross model. Clock Town, the central hub area in this context, represents the first stage of grief, denial, a defense mechanism used to deny the harsh reality of death. This is symbolized by the impending devastation that will inevitably be brought about by the moon hovering over the town, and yet still, most of the townsfolk still refuse to acknowledge the obvious looming threat. The next stage is anger, represented by the Deku of Woodfall, and their anger towards the monkey trying to help them save their lost princess. The third stage is known as bargaining, or proposed efforts of reverting death or the effects of loss, which is exemplified in Snowhead by the character of Darmani, who pleads and bargains for his life back as a ghost. The fourth stage is found in Great Bay, with the character of Lulu, who enters a deep depression after her eggs are taken from her, and is only able to break out of this state when she is reunited with her children. The final stage of grief is acceptance. With no other course, one must accept the reality of their situation and begin the process of healing and moving on, which this theory posits is what occurs in the game's final region to the protagonist himself, Link. This is exemplified in the process to progress, in which Link has to create one of each of his 4 forms and discard them before reaching the Stone Tower Temple, essentially acknowledging the previous 4 stages of grief, and finally accepting the loss of his friend. At least that's how most versions of this theory go, I think. Other people have theorized that Link himself could have been dead during the game too, but that has apparently been debunked by Legend of Zelda loreheads. And I'm sure there's plenty more symbolism to be found in regards to this theory, as well as how death is sort of a central theme of this game. But unfortunately, I'm not really the guy to get into that, and we've got a lot more theories to get to, so we'll just move on. Mario 3 is a stage play. Like I said, this is another one of the most popular gaming theories, and for good reason. This one has since been pretty much confirmed by Shigeru Miyamoto. Basically though, if you've played the game, it's quite unique in its setting compared to any of the other Mario games, especially the ones from the NES era. Like, it's immediately clear that this whole thing is taking place on a stage set as early as the curtain opening and the game's logo appearing. Obstacles and background objects have shadows over the background, blocks are bolted to the background or hanging from the ceilings, and when you finish a level, you exit the stage leaving the background entirely. This is pretty obvious and kind of set in stone, as it was confirmed by Miyamoto himself in a promotional video called Mario Myths with Mr. Miyamoto. As far as the story goes, many think that Mario 3 is a glorified retelling of the events of the first game, or at least are the exaggerated exploits of the real Mario in-universe, with all of the characters in the play being actors, including of course Mario as well as Bowser, Peach, Luigi, and all the enemies. The player killed Gary's Raticate. This theory is about the original Pokemon Red and Blue games, specifically the player's rival, Gary. You fight him many times throughout the game at various landmarks and encounters, including on the SS Anne, specifically the 4th of 8 total encounters with the rival. However, this fight on the SS Anne is the last time Gary ever uses his Raticate Pokemon, which has led some to conclude that during this fight with the player, this Pokemon ends up getting killed. This is further supported by the fact that Gary, or Blue, can be found in the Lavender Town graveyard, demanding payback, saying the player has never lost a Pokemon before, implying that he has, especially because during this encounter, he only has 5 Pokemon instead of the usual 6 for the fight. Or he could have just put the Pokemon back in his box because it kinda sucks, who knows. That's just how the theory goes anyway. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a simulation. Metal Gear Solid 2 is hard enough to completely understand on its own. It has so many twists and turns in its story, it's borderline nonsensical and sort of surreal in the best possible way. Probably my favorite Metal Gear Solid game, as it is for many others. A popular theory that has been circulating ever since the game released back in 2001 is that it is a VR simulation created by the Patriots and doesn't actually happen in the real world. If you've played the game, you know one of the big fake outs early on is that you play as Solid Snake for only a short chapter at the beginning of the game known as Tanker, before becoming a completely new protagonist called Raiden in the Plant chapter, which is essentially the rest of the game. Many people didn't like this bait and switch at first, but I think most people got over it. It's here in the Plant chapter where this theory really originates. First of all, you're playing as a largely untested operative designated with the codename Raiden by Colonel Campbell, who in their first conversation references his astounding amounts of VR training, including later on telling Snake himself that he did a VR simulation of the Tanker chapter itself, meaning we could have still been playing as Raiden in that first chapter, doing a mere simulation of the mission. More importantly though, the Colonel throughout the game makes subtle and not so subtle references to the quote-unquote simulation.
Because they were never a part of the simulation. They're an unknown factor. He was never factored into the simulation. Leave him out of this. Complete your mission according to the simulation.
In fact, as the game goes on, it becomes more and more surreal, to the point where you really start questioning what's real and what isn't, culminating in the iconic, fourth wall-breaking monologue from the Colonel, who himself turns out to be an AI controlled by the Patriots.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
What are you talking about?
There is of course a lot more to this theory, and there are entire videos on the subject if you're interested. There's the classic fission mailed sequence in the game, another fourth wall breaking segment, as well as the clear mission similarities to the actual VR missions found both in this game and the original Metal Gear Solid.
The exercise is a resounding success. Your persona, experiences, triumphs, and defeats are nothing but byproducts.
PT is about Konami. Yet another wild Kojimbo theory. This one I believe was popularized by a YouTube video called PT's Hidden Meaning by The Great Debate back in 2019. The main thesis of the video is that a potential explanation behind the bizarre self-contained narrative of Kojima's playable teaser has nothing to do with the now cancelled Silent Hills, but was rather an autobiographical account of Kojima's departure from Konami. I'm going to oversimplify the theory here for the sake of brevity, but basically this fetus-looking thing in the sink, telling the story of a father who killed his family, that fetus may metaphorically represent Kojima himself, with the father being Konami.
Dad was such a drag. Every day he'd eat the same kind of food, dress the same, sit in front of the same kind of games. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. But then one day he goes and kills us all.
Though this playable teaser released in 2014, before Kojima was let go, and before he would go on to create his own studio. But could he have possibly predicted his own departure from the studio? This was likely due to the mounting pressure and costs to produce the high-budget AAA titles that Kojima and his teams were known to make. Meanwhile, Konami was making money hand over fist making cheap gacha mobile games, which didn't require proprietary game engines and multiple studio teams. In fact, PT would release about 10 months after Kojima would be internally demoted at Konami.
You got fired, so you drowned your sorrows in booze. You remember, right? Exactly 10 months back.
This theory gets a little bit wild, I know, but bear with me. It also states that Lisa, the main enemy that follows you around throughout the game, also killed by her husband, Konami in this case, represents Kojima's Fox engine, which him and his team created, yet was taken away from him. The radio also has a bunch of messages, dates, and numbers, including 204863, which some have interpreted as Kojima's birthday of 24/8/63, August 24th, 1963, a number the father, Konami, kept hearing before he murdered his family. Keep in mind though, despite this simply being a teaser, there are still many other theories and interpretations, but I always thought that this meta-analysis was the most interesting personally, even if it may be a little far-fetched, but hey, this is the type of discussion that Kojima's games sort of intentionally inspire, so I'm all for that. Gygus is a fetus. Again, this is one of the more popular gaming theories that you might have heard of if you've played the 1994 RPG Earthbound. It's the second entry in the Mother series, created by Ape Inc., in which you play as a young boy named Ness, alongside his friends, navigating through towns, fighting cultists, police officers, and other random people and objects, until you eventually reach the final boss of the game, Gygus, who is somewhat of a tonal whiplash in comparison to the rest of the game, which for the most part, aside from a few instances, is mostly lighthearted and comedic in tone. I mean, just look at this design and listen to the boss's theme. Gygus is a cosmic horror-like entity, the very embodiment of evil. I mean, one of your only options against him is to pray. Not only that, but after people took a closer look at the boss's design, as well as the area that precedes him, they've come up with a dark theory that kind of explains it. Essentially, this theory claims that Gygus is an aborted fetus. The only way to fight Gygus is to go back in time, at which point you reach an area called the Devil Machine that looks eerily similar to the human body, possibly fallopian tubes, or some other part of the female reproduction system. Reaching the end, you only find Gygus in what could potentially be an ovary, but the main piece of evidence comes from this part of his design. Look closely at the black background, and you can see it clearly looks like the outline of a baby, or a fetus. Proponents of this theory also point to the fact that Shigesato Itoi has claimed in interviews that he got the idea for this game after being traumatized by a movie called The Policeman and the Dismembered Beauty, which he accidentally walked in on as a child and sort of scarred him for life. But make of this what you will. Tetraforce theory. Again, I'm no expert in the Legend of Zelda franchise, and this is quite a storied and long-running theory that fans have been speculating about for decades, but I will try my best to summarize the general premise. So, of course, even if you aren't that familiar with the series like myself, you still will likely recognize the Triforce, an important symbol in the games, but also serving as essentially the logo as well. This theory posits that it's actually meant to have 4 triangles instead of just 3, making it a tetraforce. This all started thanks to screenshots of early builds of Ocarina of Time, released in 1998, which showed an extra piece below the Triforce on Link's shield. This didn't appear in any later games, but there were still other hints, or things that people construed as references to the missing 4th piece, such as the triangle-shaped hole in the middle of the Triforce, actually representing the last element, which would coincide with the other represented elements of water, wind, and fire, the last remaining, of course, being Earth. Each element of the Triforce is also represented by a goddess in the lore, but no 4th golden goddess exists, despite there clearly being a 4th element, usually portrayed with purple, which most attribute to Earth, or in some interpretations, chaos or material. Some even believe that Zelda herself could potentially be the fourth goddess, representing the earth element. This whole theory was for the most part disproved with the release of The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom in 2024, as the game further develops the lore and cosmology of the series, introducing a fourth chaotic element that is actually outside of the Triforce and the three golden goddesses, who also acts as the final boss of the game, known as Null. Undead Nightmare is John Marston's personal hell. I hope I warned you guys with spoilers earlier, because from this point on, most of these entries will spoil the games in question, and the same is true for this Red Dead Redemption theory. You have been warned. Anyways, most of you probably know at the end of the game, John Marston is killed by Edgar Ross and the US government, with you post-game taking on the role of his son, Jack Marston, if you want to continue playing in the open world. Now, later that same year that Red Dead came out, back in October of 2010, Rockstar would release an expansion called Undead Nightmare, which is beloved by many fans today. Basically, you take on the role of John Marston again in an alternate timeline in which a zombie outbreak has taken place, and even his wife and son are infected. The whole thing is pretty lighthearted and just kind of a fun thing to do after the depressing end of the main story, but this theory proposes a different explanation, a darker one that suggests that this is actually sort of canon, in a purgatory that John Marston is trapped in following his death. It would explain the multiple oddities that take place, such as mythical creatures like chupacabras and Sasquatches existing, on top of there already being a zombie apocalypse, and it would also lean into one of John's only fears: corpses. Also, in the final mission of the DLC, you confront an Aztec goddess, seemingly responsible for the zombie plague, with a name I won't even try to pronounce, but basically, she goads Marston into looking into his own conscience to determine if a bad man can have a soul. Reminds me of the enigmatic strange man and the weird philosophical conversations he had with John Marston earlier on in the campaign. Maybe he ties into this theory as well. Is John confronting his guilt and the people he killed throughout his life as an outlaw, manifested as an endless undead horde? In the epilogue, on a pale horse, John Marston himself rises from the grave as a zombie, so make of that what you will, I guess. Squall is dead. No doubt the most well-known and discussed theory from Final Fantasy VIII has to be the Squall is dead theory. This is sort of similar to the whole Ash coma Pokemon theory, if you've heard that one before. Basically, it's thought that the entire game, through the perspective of the protagonist, Squall Leonhardt, is some kind of a dream or hallucination after Disc 1. This is of course being because of the dramatic ending of this act, in which Squall is impaled with an ice shard and falls off the parade float, closing his eyes as the game cuts to black, and asks the player to insert Disc 2. Doing so just has Squall waking up like nothing ever happened, even with the protagonist acknowledging he no longer had the wound, which is weird, considering one of Squall's most defining physical traits in his character design is the scar on his face, given to him in a battle in the opening scene. So how did he survive, and with no wound, or did he at all? Maybe the rest of the game is Squall's final vision, a dream, his life flashing before his eyes. If you've ever played Spec Ops: The Line, there's pretty much the exact same theory going on with the character of Walker, which I discussed in a whole video I did on that game. Just like Spec Ops: The Line as well, towards the end of the game, there is some dialogue sort of alluding to this fact, as well as strange images and flashbacks of characters flashing through Squall's mind after defeating the final boss, including a creepy portrait of himself without his face. Shiverstar is Earth. The Kirby lore goes deep, guys, and Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards from 2000 may reveal the dark future of what happened to our planet in the Kirby universe. In the game, you visit various different planets, or stars, including Kirby's homeworld of Popstar. The most interesting, though, is level 5, Shiverstar, which is a cold world devoid of basically all life. The planet is about the size of Earth and has one orbiting moon. The levels themselves feature a giant mall, some tall buildings, and a factory, all obvious man-made constructions, leading us to the dark conclusion that this was once Earth, until it was likely destroyed due to some sort of climate event and became uninhabitable. Harley Quinn loses a baby. This is a theory proposed for Batman Arkham City, released in 2011 by Rocksteady, the second in the series, and the sequel to the critically acclaimed Batman Arkham Asylum. The game featured a few Easter eggs alluding to the fact that Harley Quinn was pregnant. The first can be found in Harley's base in the steel mill, where you can find a pregnancy test next to one of her costumes, with a positive result. Even stranger, if you go back to the same spot in the Harley Quinn's Revenge DLC, you can find a crib with a Joker plush inside of it, with a bunch of pregnancy tests around it, all of which are negative. The one positive result sits in the crib with the doll. I think this is actually implying that this one test was a fluke and more a false positive, but according to this theory, it's much darker, as the baby never appears or is even mentioned in the sequel, Arkham Knight, so some believe that Harley may have had a miscarriage, possibly due to a fight she had with Batman, the player. Shepard was indoctrinated. Again, this is a series that I really have yet to delve into here, so I can only really repeat how others have described this theory, but be warned it does spoil elements of the entire story, including the climax of the third installment. Basically, this theory posits that the final sequence of Mass Effect 3 takes place in Commander Shepard's mind. The antagonists of the games, the Reapers, are ancient, highly advanced synthetic machines with the ability to indoctrinate or influence the minds of organic beings, including humans, that simply come into contact with them, including people you encounter in the games, but also, according to this theory, even the player character of Shepard, with the final section being a test of if Shepard can resist their mind control or not. This would make a lot of sense given how many times your character has come into direct contact with not only Reaper artifacts, but actual Reapers themselves. Mass Effect 3 in particular has many scenes alluding to the fact that Shepard is under some kind of Reaper influence, usually depicted with the memories of a child he sees when Earth is first attacked. This same child also happens to be the form the Catalyst takes at the end of the game. In fact, the child, despite appearing in the beginning of the game, is not acknowledged by any other character other than Shepard, meaning this indoctrination has already taken place since at least the start of Mass Effect 3. Your choice at the end of the game is the result of this process, whether you choose to destroy the Reapers, synthesize with them, or control them. Mason Kennedy. I have to be kinda careful about how I talk about this, or word any of this for that matter, as it's a bit of a sensitive topic with YouTube, but just to be clear, this is a Black Ops 1 theory. For those that haven't played it, the game delves into old conspiracy lore for its plot, involving MK-Ultra, mind control, and sleeper agents. The protagonist of the game, Alex Mason, is one of these. After being captured in a failed assassination attempt on Fidel Castro, he is given as a gift to a Soviet military commander called Dragovich, who uses some sort of numbers-based brainwashing to turn Mason into a sleeper agent. After Mason eventually escapes Vorkuta prison, he is briefed personally by President Kennedy for a mission to kill Dragovich, but during this, well, some weird stuff happens.
We are in grave danger from the communists. Our freedom, our very way of life is at risk. Dragovich. I'm told that you are the very best that we have. Anywhere.
It's pretty clear here that Mason was brainwashed with the intent of him killing his president, which is actually likely what happened in the Black Ops universe, or he at least helped Lee Harvey Oswald to do it. This is implied in the mission Revelations, where Mason says that Oswald was compromised, possibly suggesting he may have been the second shooter, again sort of nodding to classic conspiracy theories. And when you finally confront Dragovich at the end of the game, Mason says,
"Tried to turn me against my own. Tried to make me kill my own president. Tried."
This, of course, pretty heavily implies that Mason was responsible. Not only that, but also in the credits of the game, you get archival footage of JFK on the day he was, with Mason reciting the date and location over the footage, with Mason even appearing in the crowd. It honestly doesn't really get any more clear cut than this. I would say this is pretty much confirmed. It just doesn't explicitly come out and say that he did it, just heavily implies it with scenes like these. The Forerunners were humans. So in the modern 343 or Halo Studios era of Halo that we now have, this isn't actually true to the lore anymore, but there is a fan theory that's been circulating for a while that the Forerunners, an ancient civilization responsible for the creation of the Halo ring itself, and much of the interesting and peculiar architecture you see in these games, were intended to be early humans, which honestly would have been so much better. Not to just do the meme of everything Bungie did with Halo was better, but unfortunately, it's kind of true, I'm sorry to say. Forerunners in the current lore are basically just, from my limited understanding, an ancient species of highly advanced technological beings who took it upon themselves to be the protectors of the galaxy, most notably against the Flood, later naming humanity as their successors, giving them the title of Reclaimer. Now listen, I'm no Halo lorehead, I haven't read any books or anything like that, none of the lore podcasts, I didn't read through every single terminal, but let me just say that from playing all the games in the original trilogy, it seems pretty clear from a cursory glance and a general understanding of the story that humans are at the very least descendants of the Forerunners, thanks to humans being required to actually activate the Halo rings themselves, as seen in both Halo 2 and 3. Not to mention when Guilty Spark betrays you at the end of Halo 3, he literally says to Chief,
"You are the child of my makers, inheritor of all they left behind. You are Forerunner. But this ring is mine."
Listen, when it comes to in-game storytelling, this seems like an end-all be-all to me, but I guess 343 had other plans. If this isn't enough evidence, the original ending of Halo 2 as seen in storyboards literally shows Arbiter opening a Forerunner sarcophagus to reveal a human skeleton. Jason is an undercover cop. So this is a bit of a unique one, considering at the time of me making this video, the game in question isn't even out yet. This is purely speculation based on information from leaks and from the game's trailers themselves. I'm of course talking about the long-awaited Grand Theft Auto 6. Now, I won't go into any leaked story missions or anything like that with this theory. This is purely based, as far as I understand, on the gameplay along with the promotional material that Rockstar has provided, and the trailers, which all point to a particular plot twist that may be coming for the story, if you subscribe to this theory, that is. Okay, so most of you by now know if you're at all hyped for this game, which I'm sure like 99% of people are, right? But, you know, the protagonists of the game are Lucia and Jason, both portrayed as criminals in the trailers, but maybe there is more to Jason. Maybe he's secretly an undercover cop. It would definitely be a pretty Rockstar thing to do. I mean, name me one Rockstar game where there isn't a significant betrayal by a main character. It doesn't exist, especially not in the GTA series. As far as evidence for this goes, I mean, there is an entire game theory by MatPat, so there's that. There's also the obvious parallels to the story of GTA 3, which had a similar dynamic with Claude and Maria, who ended up betraying him at the beginning of the game. There's also the Trailer 1 song, Love is a Long Road, which is a bittersweet love song that could be alluding to the eventual ending of their relationship. This doesn't exactly point to Jason being a cop though, just that their relationship might sour or even end at some point. However, there are some other clues, including a character asking if Jason is a Fed, which seems a little on the nose to put in a trailer if this was actually going to be a planned plot twist. There is the fact that Jason is ex-military as well, which is pretty typical for a lot of law enforcement after they return from deployment. There's also the body cam footage, which could be from Jason's perspective as a cop, although this is really just speculation. He could even be the cop seen in front of the body cam, as Jason in screenshots can be seen wearing a similar Kevlar vest and backwards cap. For the most part though, there isn't much evidence supporting this, and funnily enough, this has been a long-running trend for Rockstar Games getting this kind of fan theory prior to the game's release. It happened not that long ago in fact with Franklin in GTA 5, people thought he was a cop, but even with Arthur Morgan, somehow people thought that he was an undercover Pinkerton agent for some reason, so who knows. The companion cube is made of corpses. Another certified hood classic, Portal is known to have maybe more theories than any other video game series that I can think of, which is kind of wild considering there's only 2 of them. Still, these games hold some of the deepest and darkest mysteries in all of Valve's catalog. One of the most well-known and accepted theories is that the companion cube, which you receive in Portal 1's Test Chamber 17, which you have to use to solve the room's puzzles, before eventually being forced to destroy it with the Aperture Science Incinerator, is actually made of, well, dead test subjects. Doing so gives you the achievement Fratricide with the icon of a skull replacing the heart on the cube. Fratricide being the act of killing one's sister or brother. This could be just a metaphorical thing, as the companion cube is the closest thing you have to a friend in this game. Alone with only GLaDOS to speak to you, it's the only truly friendly thing in the entire game pretty much, despite being an inanimate object, and yet you are still forced to destroy it. Though there are a few more hints that maybe something more is going on with the weighted companion cube. Potentially maybe failed and deceased Aperture Science subjects were crushed and condensed into the cube, which is why GLaDOS says the cube shouldn't talk, but if it does, ignore its advice. This is interesting because in a prequel comic, a companion cube does talk to the character of Ratman, though this could technically all be in his mind. Throughout his den scene in Portal, you can find various pictures of Aperture Science employees with their faces plastered over with images of the companion cube. Could they have been victims placed into these cubes? It's definitely a possibility, given GLaDOS's further comments in Portal 2 that the cubes are in fact sentient. Maybe the creepiest detail is that when they are incinerated, it sounds like someone screaming "help me" can be heard mixed in with the audio. Limbo is the boy's punishment. Limbo is sort of a hard game to pin down in terms of its narrative. The game foremost sets out to create a certain atmosphere rather than telling a standard, easy-to-digest story, evoking aesthetics inspired by the German Expressionism movement in 1940s film noir. The game has no text and no dialogue, and the story kind of has to be ascertained from environmental storytelling. The only thing that's known for certain is the game's brief description, which reads, quote, "Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo." It's a horror platforming puzzle game where you play as a boy who wakes up in a forest and traverses harsh and dark landscapes with monsters and traps in search for his sister and the light, eventually finding her at the end of the game, back in the forest where it started, and then the game just sort of ends. What does any of this mean? Well, many theories have been proposed about the game's story, usually of course related to the concept of limbo, as in a transitional place in the afterlife between heaven and hell. Most believe that at the end of the game, when the boy smashes through the glass and ends up back in the forest, this represents the boy's death, which is why you end up back where you started, basically, as Limbo repeats, with the boy having to do his adventures over and over again for eternity, searching for the light, trying possibly to escape and reach heaven, or looking for the soul of his sister, who died possibly alongside him. Maybe the glass represents a fatal car crash, which is why there are 2 graves by the treehouse in the menu background, and the enemies and obstacles presented throughout the game are fears the young boy had as a child, such as being afraid of heights, spiders, the dark, and even other kids his own age. Master Hand controls the characters. I always thought the Master Hand was kind of a weird and seemingly out of place character in the Super Smash Bros. Games, but this theory I think gives a pretty good explanation for its existence. If you haven't played the games or the story modes, this hand is essentially the main antagonist of the series, and typically the final boss of the games, and it's just what it sounds like, literally a hand. But what's the lore behind this anyway? Well, the theory is that Master Hand is basically Andy from Toy Story. It represents a person playing with toys, making their favorite Nintendo and gaming characters fight each other. In the original Smash for the N64, the opening scene shows the Master Hand literally grabbing the characters out of a toy box, placing them on his desk, and turning it into an arena for them to fight in. It doesn't get much more cut and dry than this, really. But what's interesting is you can see this kid playing with toys sort of evolve and grow up as the series does, again similar to Andy from Toy Story. His room changes with each installment, and with Melee, we even get the introduction of the Crazy Hand, which is the destructive alter ego of Master Hand. But it gets even more complicated with Brawl, as the story of Subspace Emissary reveals that the Master Hand itself was being controlled by another entity called Taboo. Maybe by this point the boy has grown up into an adult, but the taboo of adults playing with toys stops him from continuing his hobby he's had ever since childhood. There's even more stuff you can delve into with the Master Core in Smash 4 or the Army of Hands in 5, but I think you get the idea. The only other thing I think worth noting about this is that some take it a step further and say that Master Hand actually represents the creator of the franchise, Masahiro Sakurai, which honestly isn't that far-fetched of an idea. The true villain of Manhunt. This is one I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I don't think I really got to discuss it in my Manhunt iceberg, at least not to the full extent of this theory. For those unaware, Manhunt is a 2003 stealth action horror title created by Rockstar Games, in which you play as a death row inmate who is allowed to live if he can kill certain gang members in a snuff film created by a washed-up director named Starkweather. Starkweather talks to you for most of the game, guiding you as you kill. He's the one that set you free in the beginning, until about halfway through where he tries to have you killed in a big finale, which of course doesn't go his way, leading the protagonist, Cash, on a mission to get revenge on Starkweather, which he does do in the final mission of the game, Deliverance. However, what if I told you that Starkweather wasn't the true villain of the game? It's not Pigsy either, or anyone ever seen in the actual game itself, but rather a background character only acknowledged by the game's manuals, promotional material, and background lore. That character is known as Mr. Nasty. See, throughout the game's narrative, you are pretty much led to believe that this snuff film ring begins and ends with Starkweather. He is the one running the show. I mean, he's the director after all. He sends all the gangs after you, he pulls the strings as it were. At least that's what we're led to believe. Maybe even higher up the food chain is the producer. Much like in real film productions, there's someone providing the capital, overseeing the development, and most importantly, the distribution. This character, often represented by the masked man on the game's cover, is Mr. Nasty. Despite not appearing in the game himself, his company, Valiant Video Enterprises, pops up quite a few times. You can find their vans scattered throughout the game, and some promotional material for the title was even made, like a fictional website for distributing the films. On this now archived website, you can find a pretty disturbing image of Mr. Nasty, marked as me. The site also sells filmmaking materials like VHS tapes, and weapons like baseball bats, garrote wire, and other things for creating these illegal movies. The scariest part, I think, is that most people have no idea that this character even exists. It's a little too real. Much like in real life, the creators of illegal and obscene material are almost never known, and unfortunately, never face justice. Animal Crossing Cult. The Animal Crossing cult theory kind of turns the kid-friendly, cozy exterior of these social simulation games on its head. Maybe it's a bit far-fetched, but some have proposed the theory that Tom Nook, the Tanuki real estate broker and shop owner who introduces the character to the game and loans them a house, is also the leader of a cult of anthropomorphic animals, hence why the player is pretty much the only human to be found. You are taken to this community by a guy called Cap'n, named after a Japanese mythological creature that kidnaps children. Furthermore, you're sort of forced to work in this community by Tom Nook in order to pay off the debt for the house that he lends you, sort of keeping you trapped in the cult. There are some other odd things that you might notice, such as the Mayor Tortimer saying that he will always be waiting and watching, kind of an odd thing to say. Weirdest of all probably is when you try to leave the town through this door, a voice on the other end says, "Quick, hide the," before being cut off. Not saying I actually buy into this theory, I'm just presenting it to you. That goes for almost all of them in this list, really. Fallout 3 predicted the future. Surprisingly, I didn't cover this in my media that predicted the future iceberg. Check that out after this if you haven't seen it. But yes, this theory states that Fallout 3 may have predicted future events that actually came true in the real world. This isn't actually found in the game itself though, rather in a pretty popular Fallout 3 creepypasta known as Number Station, which did in fact kind of predict some future events, kind of. The story goes that in certain locations in the game when you tune into Galaxy News Radio, after killing the host 3-Dog and destroying Raven Rock, you can hear seemingly random numbers, which are actually Morse code, that when translated give various dates and text describing future events to come. Some were events that already happened, like the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, while others at the time were set in the then future of the 2010s and 2020s. The reason I think some people began to believe this creepypasta is because it did predict an oil spill accident taking place in 2010, a catastrophic disaster known as the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and explosion, which would occur off the Gulf of Mexico on April 20th, 2010, killing 11 workers in total. The author may have also predicted the death of Gary Coleman that same year, with the message, "What you talking about? You will be missed," in reference to the catchphrase of his character Arnold Jackson in the sitcom Different Strokes. It also allegedly predicted a 2010 YouTube video, uploaded on the exact date, of someone kicking bums in the nuts, though it has not been archived. And of course, this could have just been a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy thing, of someone trying to make this more believable by uploading a video with that title on that specific date. There are also a lot of false predictions though as well, as you might have guessed, and some that did kind of come true, just not in the same time frame that the creepypasta states, like its 2014 prediction of the death of Queen Elizabeth, which didn't happen until 2022. Saddam Hussein PS2 WMD. We go from a gaming hoax to actual real-life gaming-related conspiracy theories. This was an insane urban legend from the early 2000s that Saddam Hussein was buying up as many PS2s as he could get his hands on, reportedly in the ballpark of about 4,000 consoles, in order to create a supercomputer to build a weapon of mass destruction. Yes, this is pretty insane, and I have no idea how this rumor even started, but hilariously enough, many have suggested this began as some sort of Sony glaze sesh, making the PS2 out to be such a high-performing piece of hardware that it could very well be used for such military applications. Now, I'm a huge fan of this console myself, probably my favorite of all time right next to the Xbox 360, but come on, this is kinda wild, right? Apparently though, the US military did end up making such a thing with the PS3, creating what is known as the Condor Cluster in 2010, using 1,760 consoles, so maybe not as ridiculous as I thought. Donkey Kong Country represents the Banana Wars. Before we get into the actual theory, I have to do a little bit of background history context. The Banana Wars were a series of conflicts involving American military intervention in Central America and the Caribbean between the years of 1898 and 1934. The primary justification behind these conflicts was to advance American interests, mostly economically and for trade reasons in the region. The term Banana Wars highlights not only the main exports of the affected countries, but also the economic motive behind it. This theory suggests that Donkey Kong Country, released in 1994 for the SNES, is an allegory of these wars and America's imperialist actions in trying to control the banana trade. Whether or not this was intentional is up for you to decide, but the parallels are quite clear, with the game's antagonist, King K. Rool, essentially representing the United States, coming into Donkey Kong Country and stealing all of the bananas for purely economic reasons. He could also represent the United Fruit Company, a US corporation which became the de facto leader of many of these nations after taking control of the banana trade. Runescape is set in New York. This is a bit of a satirical take on a gaming conspiracy, one that I think originates from a 4chan green text post. RuneScape is a fantasy-themed MMORPG that was extremely popular in the early 2000s. Players can complete quests, upgrade skills, trade, fight NPCs, and even make bets and interact with other players, engaging in combat or other minigames. This theory states that this fantasy world that the game takes place in is actually New York City, or is based on it. This is mainly because it featured a densely packed city with multiple boroughs and had a diverse population. People are always moving, there's infinite ways to make money, including begging, killing, or even the stock market, which tends to make people the richest. There's holiday events, activist groups, and even an underground teleport system. I guess make of that what you will. Cranky Kong killed Mario's father. This theory dates all the way back to before Mario was even a character, with the 1981 arcade title Donkey Kong, which, yes, if you didn't know, preceded Super Mario Bros. You do play as a Mario-looking character, at the time known as Jumpman, dodging barrels and climbing platforms and ladders to rescue a lady from Donkey Kong. Since this game is said to take place in New York and not the Mushroom Kingdom, as well as because of the fact that it came out first, many believe this is actually a prequel, and Mario is a descendant of Jumpman, possibly his son, and the Donkey Kong in the game is actually Cranky Kong, modern-day Donkey Kong's grandfather. In the 1982 sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., the roles are reversed, and Jumpman is now the villain, with Donkey Kong Jr. trying to save his father from captivity. And at the end of the game, Jumpman falls to the ground, with a halo floating above his head, signaling he pretty much died. Sans is Ness. This is another one made famous by game theory, which posits that Sans from Undertale, an Earthbound-inspired game in its own right, is actually Ness, the protagonist from Earthbound. Basically, Sans is the final boss of Undertale in the Genocide route, and generally regarded as the hardest boss in the game, and one of the two main skeleton brothers, the other being Papyrus. This is because Sans doesn't really seem to fit in with the rest of the characters in the underworld, even compared to his own brother. He talks about getting back home and says in the pacifist ending that we call the giant red ball in the sky the sun. It seems from this and from some other dialogue seen in the Genocide route that at the very least, Sans is from the surface world. Furthermore, players found a hidden workshop of Sans that contains items possibly linked to Earthbound and Ness. Specifically, it mentions a badge, possibly the Franklin badge, a staple item in the Mother series, that at one point belonged to Ness. On top of that, the workshop also has a photo album with Sans and people you don't recognize, possibly the other characters from Earthbound. The other items are some indecipherable blueprints and a broken machine, which could very well be the time machine that Ness and his friends used to confront Gygus. Maybe that's also how he ended up here and became Sans. Food for thought, I guess. Mortal Kombat 1 was supposed to be Injustice 3. Mortal Kombat 1 is an interesting name for a game with over 25 entries in the series, but this was the series' second reboot and a 2023 fighting game created by NetherRealm Studios, who also made the DC Comics fighting games Injustice Gods Among Us and Injustice 2. Apparently, according to this theory, MK1 was actually initially planned as a sequel to Injustice 2. This actually holds up pretty much because one of the creators in an interview said in 2023 that they decided to move to a different version of the Unreal Engine and wanted to do an Injustice game, but decided on making Mortal Kombat instead. Fans also point to the change in art direction. Maybe it's just because of the switch in engines, but it seems like a clear shift in art style, with brighter tones and lighting compared to the usually darker and grittier aesthetic you might expect from an MK game. A lot of animations and gameplay systems seem to have also been lifted from Injustice 2, or at least were heavily inspired by it, which is quite curious for a Mortal Kombat game, such as the Clash Talk system and the Cameo Assist system, which was likely planned for an Injustice game, as it would have allowed much more DC character representation without having to make them fully playable characters. It still works with Mortal Kombat, it just doesn't have the same appeal as a universe with a seemingly infinite trove of characters and lore to pull from. Case is Bell. This one's a bit of a head scratcher, but I can't deny that I kind of believe it. Despite Black Ops 7 just sort of ignoring the story of BO6 and Cold War entirely, all we really have to go off of are these two games which actually kind of have an interconnected story. I know a lot of people have given up on Call of Duty and probably have no idea what I'm even talking about. I at least recommend you give Black Ops Cold War a try, because honestly it's one of the best COD campaigns in modern day, but really of all time if we're being honest. The game is kind of unique though, in that you play as a mysterious operative named Bell, who is essentially a player-created character, with you choosing your own background, gender, and whatnot. This doesn't end up mattering too much though, as at the end of the game, in classic Black Ops mindfuck style, it's revealed that you were actually originally an agent of Perseus, who was brainwashed into working with the CIA. In the canon ending of the game, you still side with Adler, and you save the world, but he kills you for it. In the non-canon ending, you get to kill everyone basically. But sticking with the canon route, it would seem Bell is dead, especially since we see Adler alive in Black Ops 6. In that game you play as another mysterious character, who we never actually get to see, known simply as Case, who also may or may not have died at the end of his game in BO6. Now, how could these two possibly be the same people? Well, it's sort of a convoluted conspiracy theory that would take too long to explain, But basically, Russell Adler was behind the brainwashing of Bell. We already know that. We also know Bell was shot on January 17th, 1981 in Cold War's campaign, and coincidentally, we see in the mission Emergence in BO6 that Adler was given clearance to the Advanced Technologies and Applications Division, likely where Bell was brainwashed and where Case himself was experimented on with the cradle at the same time that Adler was working at the facility. Is it a little convoluted to have the same guy take on two separate identities and brainwashing schemes? Yes, but this is Black Ops we're talking about here. It's not outside the realm of possibility, especially when the only time Case has a strange neurological effect is either when the cradle is mentioned or in one other specific instance in which Adler gives him an order. Kind of similar to when he used a trigger phrase to control Bell in Cold War. Maybe it's a bit contrived, but the timeline does kind of line up. And why else would they go through the trouble of obscuring Case's identity so much? Like, they do give him a real name, William Calderon, but you can never see his face, even in third person in the open world mission. A little sus, if you ask me. Unfortunately, BO7 doesn't really follow up the story of Black Ops 6 in any meaningful way. We don't learn anything more about Case, and the cradle just becomes a generic bioweapon that turns into a fear gas that makes you hallucinate zombies. Valve is trying to distance themselves from gambling. This one doesn't have anything to do with any actual video game itself. Well, I mean, it does, but this is all about the Counter-Strike Steam market, which, if you know anything about that, has been pretty crazy over the last few months / year-ish. I'm sure everyone knows you can buy keys to open cases and usually get trash, but sometimes get rare skin cosmetics worth a lot of real-life money. But this practice, known as loot boxes typically, is kind of looked down upon to say the least, especially nowadays, essentially introducing gambling to kids at a young age. It definitely did so for me, unfortunately. In recent years, countries in Europe have been trying to crack down on this gambling operation that Valve is basically running, to varying degrees of success. Most didn't go too great, as Valve found ways to skirt around new laws, like introducing an X-ray gun to see inside of cases, instead of just opening them with keys, even though it serves basically the same purpose. Recently though, it seems they're slowly giving up the fight, and realizing they may have to distance themselves from cases and gambling as a whole, possibly because of new legislation that is in the works, or maybe just getting ahead of that. Many people think that this is the case because they're now pushing something called terminals instead of just case drops, which operate similarly except you don't actually pay for a key to open it. You can open it for free and accept or decline offers to buy skins. And honestly, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's actually more of a scam than the cases themselves. But could we actually see cases slowly phased out in favor of these terminals? It's possible, especially since Valve has done some other drastic actions which previously no one could have ever predicted, like adding the ability to trade up red skins into knives and gloves, which massively increased the price of covert skins and completely crashed the price of knives and gloves. On top of this, they've also shifted to doing seasonal updates with armory collection changes rather than the traditional operations they were previously known for doing, which introduced new skins and new cases for players to open and invest in. I'm definitely no expert on the CS market, and I haven't been as into the game as of recent years, but it seems like this is kind of the direction that Valve is looking to take the game. Will this remain to be the case though? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Maybe this will age like milk, who knows. All I know is don't invest money you're not willing to lose into CS cosmetics because Valve is capable of doing anything at this point. Also, I don't really have anything against cases personally. I've definitely opened my fair share and it's kind of fun in moderation, but just be careful guys. The rates on these things are abysmal and don't expect to get your money back. Never be game over. This is sort of a blanket theory covering the umbrella of the Metal Gear Solid 5 is unfinished conspiracy. The name comes from a phrase written on the back of Eli's jacket in the game. This is important because it ties into a cut mission known as Mission 51, which is central to this theory. The game only has 50 missions, a lot of which are modified versions of previous ones. The finale itself and the final act just kind of feels sort of anticlimactic and ends quite abruptly. On top of that, there are only 2 chapters in the game, while this extra cut Mission 51 suggests there were meant to be many more levels, possibly an entire 3rd chapter, that was cut from the game. Many other details have led people to believe that the game is unfinished, and I don't doubt those claims, but people have taken it to a whole new level of lunacy, thinking the third chapter might unlock at a specific date, or if certain criteria are met, such as disarming all of the nukes online, a seemingly impossible feat, which was actually achieved on PS3 I believe, and grants a pretty cool cutscene, but still, no new content for the game was discovered. This cut mission though, called Kingdom of the Flies, episode 51, shows Eli, aka Young Liquid Snake, taking control of Sahelanthropus. In the mission, Snake would have to track down Eli to an African island and recapture Sahelanthropus and rescue Eli and the other child soldiers. Quite a bit of the concept art for this mission is leaked online, and even some cutscenes that were said to be 30% complete. Although, this episode seems more like a one-off, and is even referred to as a phantom chapter, so maybe it was going to continue much farther beyond this point, or maybe this would have served as an epilogue of sorts. Still, many think this was only the start of a cut chapter 3, which may have gone unfinished and gotten cancelled after Kojima's relationship with Konami started to sour. Other people believe that this hollow feeling you're left with at the end of the game, with it ending so abruptly, is actually intentional on the part of Kojima. Whether or not he got to include all the content he wanted, this is the final game, his final vision, at least for what he had to work with. He wanted the game to feel as though something was missing, a phantom pain one might say. While others just say this is, just pure cope. I guess that's up for you to decide. Either way, it may be a polarizing game in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, but it's still an amazing game for sure.